Whispers of the Ancients, Episode 8, Moli Empire. The Griots' Golden Age, approximately 1235 to 1600 CE, echoes of memory and majesty. Before the ink of historians, there were the Griots. In the heart of West Africa, where rivers bend like ancestral stories, a kingdom rose from the gold-laden earth, mighty yet melodic, guided by memory keepers, and crowned by a man whose name echoed across continents, Mansa Musa. This is the story of Moli, not just of conquest and coin, but of knowledge, rhythm, and the voices that refused to die. Segment 1, Sundiata, the Lion King of Mand. In the 13th century, the land that would become Moli was a mosaic of rival chieftains, clans, and fractured loyalties. The Ghana Empire had crumbled, and in its void, chaos reigned. But out of this disarray emerged a legend, a prince exiled in childhood, mocked for his disability, yet destined to forge unity from division. Sundiata Keita, the epic of Sundiata, preserved in oral tradition by Griots for generations, recounts a tale both mythic and historic. According to the legend, Sundiata could not walk as a boy, but as Mandinka kingdoms fell into disrepair, and his homeland of Niani cried out for leadership, the young exile rose. The moment he stood, it is said, the earth itself trembled. Sundiata rallied a coalition of Mandinka clans and led them to victory at the Battle of Kirina in 1235. There, he defeated the Soso king, Sumonguru Kanti, a sorcerer king feared across the soul, and proclaimed the birth of the Moli Empire. From this foundation, Sundiata set about building not just a kingdom, but a civilization. He established a constitution, the Kurukan Fauga, one of the oldest known charters of rights and social balance. He designated responsibilities to clans, created a council of elders, and enshrined the role of Griots as the sacred keepers of culture and law. Thus began Moli's golden age, not with gold, but with governance. Segment 2, the Mandinka world, geography, people, and spirit. The Moli Empire was vast, stretching at its height from the Atlantic coast to the edges of Lake Chad. It encompassed diverse ecosystems, from the soil-less arid savannas to the dense woods of the south and the rippling rivers of the Niger. Within this terrain lived a mosaic of peoples, Mandinka, Soninke, Fulani, Bozo, and others. The Niger River was not merely a source of water, it was the empire's lifeline. Bozo fishermen plied its currents, merchants ferried goods along its length, and cities like Jen and Timbuktu grew on its fertile banks. Social structure in Moli was tiered but flexible. Nobles, artisans, farmers, slaves, all coexisted in a complex hierarchy. Yet one caste held no land and bore no arms, but wielded the sharpest power, the Griots. Known as Jelly, they were the human libraries of Moli. Through rhythm, song, and memory, they carried the blueprints of the empire's past and present. Religion was woven into every facet of life. Most of Moli's people followed traditional African spiritual systems, a reverence for ancestors, spirits of the land, and natural forces. Islam also thrived, especially among merchants and elites, arriving via North African trade routes centuries earlier. In Moli, Islam and indigenous belief didn't clash, they harmonized. The empire stood as a confluence of peoples, beliefs, and paths. And as we move deeper, gold and knowledge become its twin pillars. Segment 3, a river of gold, economy and trade. To understand Moli is to understand gold. The empire sat atop some of the richest gold fields in the world, the Bambuk, Bior, and later the Lobi fields. At its height, Moli was the world's single largest producer of gold. But gold itself held no power unless it moved, and Moli ensured it did. Caravans of camels snaked across the Sahara, bearing not only gold but kola nuts, salt, ivory, and textiles. In return came horses, cloth, glass beads, and most significantly, books. Cities like Timbuktu and Gao became not only market towns but intellectual hubs. Markets teemed with goods from Morocco, Egypt, the Maghreb, and even Venice. Salt, quarried from the mines of Tagaza and transported across deserts, was so valuable it could be worth its weight in gold, and the porters who carried these riches, often slaves or hired men, became invisible arteries in Moli's economic body. Currency itself was fluid. Cowrie shells, gold dust and iron bars all served as mediums of exchange. Wealth was not just hoarded but redistributed, especially under rulers like Mansa Musa. Mali's greatness was not only in what it mined but in what it moved, and through movement it connected worlds. Segment for Mansa Musa, pilgrimage and power. In 1324, the known world gasped. A king, cloaked in gold, arrived in Cairo with tens of thousands in tow. His pilgrimage to Mecca became legend, not just for its piety, but for its extravagance. Mansa Musa, he distributed so much gold in Egypt that its value plummeted for over a decade. His entourage included 60,000 attendants, hundreds of camels bearing gold, and griots to recount his deeds. But Musa's journey was not mere spectacle. It was diplomacy, branding, and legacy. He returned to Mali with architects, scholars, and ideas. Mosques blossomed across the empire in Gao, in Timbuktu, and especially in the capital, Niani. He commissioned the Jingabo Mosque in Timbuktu, designed by Andalusian architect Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, a marvel of Sahelian mudbrick and wood. Mansa Musa put Mali on the map, literally. European cartographers who had never heard of West Africa now etched his image atop golden thrones in maps like the Catalan Atlas. Mali was no longer whispered in desert markets, it was shouted across oceans. And through Musa, Mali became the embodiment of Islamic West Africa, devout yet distinct. Segment 4, Timbuktu, beacon of learning in the desert. As Mali's wealth surged, so too did its intellectual flame. On the southern edge of the Sahara, in a place where camel caravans met the river's edge, the city of Timbuktu rose like a dream of scholars. Originally a Tuareg encampment, it had grown under the Mali Empire into a cosmopolitan marvel its mud-brick mosques, standing like sacred sentinels over bustling markets and quiet libraries. Timbuktu was not simply a waypoint for trade, it became a sanctuary for the mind. The University of Sankara, one of the world's earliest universities, attracted students, poets, theologians, and philosophers from across West Africa and beyond. Within its sun-dried walls, knowledge thrived. Thousands of manuscripts were copied, studied, and stored treatises on law, astronomy, medicine, grammar, and theology. Many were adorned with elaborate calligraphy and geometric designs, proof that learning here was both art and discipline. These were not idle works, they were tools of statecraft, lenses into the cosmos, and guides for the soul. Scholars debated ethics and theology beside merchants bartering spices and salt. Families passed books from generation to generation, binding themselves to the written word with a reverence akin to prayer. In a world where knowledge was power, Timbuktu was its high citadel. This fusion of intellect and empire set Mali apart. Here was a place where griots wove oral tradition, and scribes captured thought in ink, and script where memory and manuscript coexisted in harmony. Segment 5, Mansa Musa, Emperor of Gold and Faith. Then came the Emperor, who would elevate Mali to heights unimaginable, the richest man who ever lived. Mansa Musa, ascending to the throne. Around 1312 CE, Musa Keita I inherited a prosperous empire, but he would leave it legendary. In 1324, Mansa Musa undertook the Hajj, the sacred Islamic pilgrimage to Mecca. With him, he brought a retinue so vast it staggered the medieval world. Over 60,000 people, soldiers, officials, camel drivers, and slaves. Hundreds of camels carried gold dust so much that its distribution along the way devalued currency in Cairo for years. But it wasn't just gold that Musa gave. He built mosques and schools along his route. He made donations to poor communities and scholars alike. His pilgrimage was not merely a display of wealth, it was a declaration. Mali was a pious, learned, and powerful Islamic empire, and its leader, a servant of God, was worthy of both fear and respect. Upon his return, Mansa Musa transformed Timbuktu. He expanded the University of Sankara. He imported architects from Cairo and Andalusia to design mosques like Jingabo, which still stands today. And he cultivated relationships with scholars that would ripple through Mali's intellectual life. For generations, in Europe, his fame spread through maps like the Catalan Atlas of 1375, which depicted him seated on a golden throne, orb in hand, crowned in regal majesty. Mali, for a time, sat at the center of the known world, Segment 6. Griots, the guardians of memory. But long after Mansa Musa's gold had vanished and his empire had fractured, the Griots endured. The Griot, part bard, part historian, part moral compass, was the living archive of Mali. These men and women were not simply storytellers, they were custodians of ancestry, advisors to kings, and chroniclers of collective identity. A Griot could recite genealogies stretching back 1,000 years. They preserved the deeds of heroes, the judgments of elders, and the songs of celebration and sorrow. Their voices were instruments intoning rhythm, melody, and nuance to animate memory. They were trained from childhood, learning through intense apprenticeship. They memorized, improvised, and adapted. A Griot could both shame and elevate a king with the power of verse. In Mali, forgetting one's ancestors was a crime of spirit. The Griots ensured that would never happen. Even today, in West African societies, Griots scrawled Jeli or Jalir in Mound languages continue this sacred task. The sound of the Kora, or Balaform, the call of the Griot's voice, still carries centuries of memory through them. The empire of Mali never truly fell. Segment 7. Commerce and caravans, the arteries of empire. Beneath Mali's spiritual and scholarly heights lay the lifeblood of its power. Trade. The empire straddled the Niger River and the edge of the Sahara. It sat at the crossroads of camel, caravans and riverboats connecting forest to desert, savanna to sea. Salt came from the mines of Tagaza, gold from Bambouk and Bure, ivory and kola nuts from the forest zones. In return came silks, horses, glass beads, and luxury items from North Africa and the Middle East. Commerce was organized and taxed. Weighing systems were enforced, market prices monitored, and travelers protected. Cities like Jen, Gao, and Timbuktu flourished as trade depots, while rural villages provided the raw goods. The merchant class grew powerful. Many adopted Islam to facilitate connections, with North African partners leading to the growth of mosques, schools, and a shared legal culture based on Sharia. Mali's economy was thus not just resource-driven, it was relational. Its people built trust networks across thousands of miles, bonded by faith, family, and word. The empire's pulse beat along the trade routes, and with each caravan came more than goods. Stories, ideas, and identities. Segment 8. The empire's slow decline. All things rise, all things fall. By the late 14th century, cracks had begun to appear in Mali's golden walls. Successors to Mansa Musa proved less capable. Provinces grew restless. Vassal states sought independence. External pressures mounted. The Mossi raided from the south. The Tuareg took Timbuktu. The Songhai, once a tributary, grew bold and powerful, centered around Gao. By the mid-15th century, Mali had lost much of its territory and influence. In 1433, the Tuareg took control of Timbuktu. In 1468, Songhai ruler Soni Oli conquered the city, ushering in a new imperial age. But decline was not erasure. Even in its twilight, Mali's legacy endured. It lived in the manuscripts hidden in desert libraries. It echoed in Griot song. It lingered in the streets of Jen and the shadowed halls of Sanka, and it shone in memory in the collective pride of West Africa. Segment 9. Echoes of the Griots. Today, as the sun sets over the Niger River and the wind sweeps dust across the ancient lanes of Timbuktu, the Griots still sing. Their songs recall Sundiata and Musa, cities of learning, caravans of gold, and kings who ruled with wisdom and justice. Their voices remind us that Mali was not merely a place of wealth, but of mind, soul, and continuity. It is through the Griots, more than maps or ruins, that we remember Mali. They are the voices of the ancestors, the keepers of a golden age. And as long as they sing, the empire of Mali endures not in stone, but in story. Segment 10. The legacy of the Griots, memory keepers of Mali. In the grand courts of Mali, amid silks and incense, golden scrolls, one voice held the weight of centuries. Not a king, nor a priest, nor a general, but a Griot, a keeper of memory, a vessel of truth wrapped in rhythm. The Griots, known also as Jeli in Mound culture, were far more than musicians or poets. They were living libraries, trained from youth in the meticulous art of oral transmission. Each word they spoke was a thread in a tapestry that stretched back to the time of Sundiata. They remembered lineages, settled disputes, preserved moral codes, and reminded rulers of the cost of forgetting, with the chorus' soft plucks or the balafons' resonant notes. They wove sagas of bravery and betrayal, of mercy and power, through voice and melody. They taught history not as dead record, but as breath, living, pulsing, and echoing across generations. To be praised by a griot was to be immortalized. To be scorned by one was to be publicly shamed. The misdeed burned into communal memory. Their power was not drawn from swords or gold, but from the sanctity of collective remembrance. Even today, long after the fall of Imperial Mali, the griots endure. In villages and cities, their voices carry old wisdom into new ears, a bridge across centuries, never broken. Segment 11, Cities of Knowledge, Timbuktu and Jen. Across the hot sands and sweeping savannas, there rose cities that shimmered not with gold, but with knowledge. Timbuktu, once a nomadic outpost, had become a beacon of Islamic learning. By the 14th century, it was a city of madrasas, mosques, and thousands of manuscripts. Scholars from Egypt, Morocco, and Andalusia came to lecture, study, and debate. The city's famed Sanka universe. It hosted discussions on law, astronomy, medicine, and theology. Its sister city, Jen, rivaled it in grandeur. Built on the banks of the Boni River, it boasted the majestic Great Mosque of Jen, the world's largest mud brick structure. Every year, the city's residents replastered the mosque by hand, a ritual as sacred as prayer. In these cities, Arabic and Mand intermingled on parchment and in conversation. Trade caravans brought not only salt and goods but scrolls and ideas. The Sultan's court funded libraries and private collectors guarded ancient texts with care. Knowledge was power, and Mali wielded it as deftly as it did spears or scales. Segment 12, The Pilgrimage of Mansa Musa, a golden reverberation. In 1324, the world saw Mali in all its radiant glory. Mansa Musa, Lord of Gold and Guardian of Islam, embarked on a hajj to Mecca that would leave ripples felt from Cairo to Constantinople. He did not travel humbly. His caravan reportedly stretched for miles with 60,000 men, 12,000 servants, and 80 camels laden with gold dust. At every stop, Musa gave lavish gifts, gold to the poor, donations to mosques, endowments to scholars. In Cairo, his generosity was so immense that it caused a temporary devaluation of gold, a fiscal shock that echoed across Mediterranean markets for years. But this journey was more than extravagance. It was diplomacy, it was spectacle, and it placed Mali, once seen as a remote kingdom, squarely on the map of the Islamic world. European cartographers began to etch Musa's image onto their Mapai Mundi, depicting him enthroned with a nugget of gold the size of a fist. Musa's pilgrimage was a sermon in splendor, one that spoke of Mali's wealth, faith, and stature louder than any envoy could. Segment 13, The Decline Begins, Seeds of Fragmentation. Empires, like rivers, can only be diverted so long before they change course. After Mansa Musa's reign, the empire continued to shine, but cracks began to form. His successors, though competent, could not match his charisma or strategic prowess. Provincial governors began to assert independence. Vassal states grew restless. External threats mounted. To the north, the Berber-led Mossi raided the fringes of Mali's domain. To the west, the Songhai, once vassals themselves, began to rise in defiance. Trade routes, once carefully managed, fell prey to shifting alliances and banditry. The once cohesive empire began to unravel. The heart of Mali still beat, but its limbs grew numb. Segment 14, The Rise of Songhai, Shadow of a Successor. In the east, a new power stirred. The Songhai, based in the city of Gao, watched Mali's decline with growing ambition. By the 15th century, under the leadership of Sunni Ali and later Askia Muhammad, the Songhai launched a series of military campaigns that steadily eroded Mali's hold over key trade cities. Timbuktu, Jen, and the surrounding lands shifted allegiance willingly or by force. The empire that had once inspired or now stood dwarfed by its former vassals. Mali's influence shrank back to the Mount Heartland, the great highways of commerce now bypassed. Its borders, But even in defeat, Moli's legacy lingered in the architecture of mosques, in the manuscripts of libraries, and in the verses of Griots. Segment 15. Enduring echoes, Moli's legacy in the modern world. Though its empire fell, the spirit of Moli endures. Its manuscripts, once feared lost, have resurfaced in recent decades, revealing a rich tradition of scholarship, theology, and poetry. Its music, infused with the rhythm of the Griots, continues to shape West African soundscapes and inspire global audiences. The ruins of Niani and Timbuktu whisper of past grandeur. The salt roads still cross the Sahara, and every time a Griot begins to sing of Sundiata, of Mansa Musa, of the ancestors, Moli lives again. It was an empire forged not only by conquest and commerce, but by culture. Its strength lay not just in gold, but in stories. And long after the last palace crumbled, those stories, golden, soaring, eternal, remain. Segment 16, continuing in proper sequential format. Segment 16, the Griots and the fire of memory. They did not build with stone or write on scrolls, but their legacy endures etched into voices, melodies and tales carried on the wind. The Griots of Moli, bards and historians, were the lifeblood of man's memory. From village hearths to royal courts, they recited the deeds of kings, the lineage of clans, the triumphs and follies of humanity. A Griot was not merely a singer, but a walking library, trained from childhood to carry the histories of an empire. They told of Sundiata, the lion king who founded Moli, his childhood frailty and divine destiny. They recounted Mansa Musa's caravan to Mecca, his generosity that turned cities to gold and chronicles to all. In the epic of Sundiata, they wove ancestral lessons of justice, magic, betrayal, and redemption. These oral traditions formed a shared consciousness, giving the Malians a spiritual cohesion and purpose that transcended dynastic change. Segment 17, Timbuktu, a city of sand and scholars, nestled on the edge of the Sahara. Timbuktu was more than a trading post. It was the intellectual heart of West Africa, where camel caravans delivered not only salt and gold, but wisdom. As early as the 14th century, it drew scholars from Cairo, Fez, and beyond. Its mosques, such as Djinguba commissioned by Mansa Musa, stood as mud-brick monuments to Islamic devotion and architectural ingenuity. But it was the libraries and madrasas that ignited the imagination. At its height, Timbuktu housed tens of thousands of manuscripts written in Arabic and Ajami on subjects ranging from astronomy to theology, medicine to mathematics. The University of Sankore became a magnet for students across the Islamic world, with syllabi rivaling those of Cairo and Cordoba. It confirmed Moli's place within the Ummah of Islamic learning. The scholars of Timbuktu, such as Ahmad Baba, challenged European stereotypes of a silent, illiterate Africa. They proved that African intellectualism was not derivative but native, proud, and resilient. Segment 18, the fracturing of an empire. Empires rarely fall with a single blow. Moli, vast and rich, became unwieldy in time. The later Mansas, though sovereign in name, could not match the charisma or command of Musa or Sundiata. The provinces grew restive. Local lords withheld tribute. Foreign threats swelled at the fringes. By the late 15th century, the Songhai Empire rose along the Niger, capturing the trade routes once ruled by Moli. The sacking of Timbuktu by Songhai forces marked not just a political shift, but a wound to Moli's soul. Though the Korman territories persisted, the golden age had passed. But Moli was never simply defined by borders. Its spirit remained in its griots, in the folk tales that leapt from lips to ears, in the music of the kora and the echo of desert footsteps retracing ancestral paths. Segment 19, Legacy in Bronze and Bloodlines. Though the empire declined, its legacy echoed through West Africa. The traditions it fostered, the Griot lineage, Islamic scholarship. Trade networks became foundations for successor states. Its cultural influence spread into the Hausa kingdoms, the Mossi realms, and even among the Fulani. Today, the stories of Mansa Musa inspire not just historians, but artists, writers, and diasporic dreamers seeking to reconnect with a glorious African past. His pilgrimage is not only remembered for its opulence, but for how it broadcast West African sovereignty and wealth to the world. Artifacts from Mali manuscripts, tools, jewelry still surface from the sands, testifying to a civilization sophisticated, structured, and deeply human. Segment 20, the Griots' final song. As twilight falls across the savannah and desert winds curl through the remnants of ancient cities, one can still imagine the Griots gathered around a fire. Their voices rise, slow and rhythmic, as they summon kings long dead, ancestors long buried. The Mali Empire may have waned, but it is never truly gone. It lives in memory, song, and a yearning for dignity. It lives in every West African child who learns the tale of Sundiata, in every scholar who opens a dusty manuscript in Timbuktu, in every drumbeat that recalls the thunder of camel hooves across Saharan trails. Mali was an empire not only of gold and conquest but of words, and words once spoken with truth never truly die.